Hello and welcome to the Cheeky Science Show. In this video, we'll look at conditional protein degradation systems. So to give a more long-winded explanation to the title of this video, we're going to look at how proteins can be degraded in a temporally controlled manner and how the system can be used in experimental setups to help you understand the function of a protein. So I'll introduce a variety of different ways of developing these conditional protein degradation systems and look at some of the good aspects of them and some of the limitations. But firstly, a brief intro to protein degradation. So all eukaryotic cells are equipped with protein quality control systems. So we know that proteins are encoded in mRNA that's encoded in DNA as different genes. And so these proteins over time become misfolded, they can get damaged, and obviously that's bad for a cell to have damaged proteins in a cell. So these proteins get degraded by the 26S proteasome. Well, there's other systems as well. And so the idea is, if we want to manipulate the system, how can we promote and switch on and off this protein degradation to work in our favour, such that we can control the levels of a protein in a cell to understand that protein better. So as I've somewhat already explained, why would we need to do this? So likely one of the most common applications of these conditional protein degradation systems is to be able to understand a protein of interest function in vivo. And so we can do this by having a system that enables us to either remove or to bring back this protein to see the cellular phenotype with and without it. So these conditional protein degradation systems have been referred to as molecular switches because they effectively are tools that enable us to study a protein when it is and isn't there. And so what I mean by degron is a domain that induces degradation. So you can add this degron domain to a protein to enable degradation to occur. And then you can make them conditional by using a variety of different methods that I'll talk through in this video, including temperature, small molecules, light, and the expression of other proteins. In particular, I'll focus on small molecules, mainly because I understand that a bit better and have a bit of experience of actually using these systems. So why would we want to control protein levels at the protein level as opposed to the DNA or the RNA level? So I may have phrased that question a bit badly in terms of the fact if we want to control the protein level, it kind of makes sense to control it at the protein level. But the thing is, we didn't really have that technology a while ago. So the most common ways to try to understand a protein would be to literally delete the gene, get rid of it, or to knock it down at the mRNA level to prevent the levels globally of how much protein there is. So the thing is, this technology is pretty recent and it has some real key advantages. So firstly, it's faster. If we want to suddenly get rid of a protein at the protein level, we can get rid of it pretty fast depending on the system. But if we decided to delete the gene or to start to knock down the mRNA levels, we'd have to wait for the current protein already present in the cell to get degraded and to deplete before we see a global depletion based on either preventing the transcription or the translation of the protein. The protein level can also be more specific, so with these degrons we can specifically target that degron as opposed to gene deletions where you might have off-target effects, likewise with the RNA depletion methods. And lastly, it can be reversible. So if you decided to knock out a gene, you can't just get that gene back again, whereas if you've got a conditional system that depletes at a protein level, such as using a small molecule, you can add and then take away that molecule to reverse the effect of the protein. And so the other thing with it being very fast in terms of the knockdown is that we get a direct effect as opposed to a slow depletion that might introduce secondary artifacts. So we'll come back to this Nature paper later, but in the supplementary they have a very nice table that summarises all of the benefits and limitations to using these different systems if you want that little bit of extra detail. Okay, so how do these different systems work? So as I've already mentioned, they employ the use of degrons, and then they combine it with these different lights, small molecules, temperature, to make the system conditional, so that you as an experimentalist can control when you want to deplete or to bring back your protein. Now, most of what I'm going to say comes from this really excellent review article that I'll put a link to in the description. Okay, so let's start by looking at the temperature-sensitive conditional protein degradation systems. So, at least so far that I think, there are two main systems, the TS degron and the LT degron, TS standing for temperature-sensitive degron. And so These systems work by altering the temperature from a low to a high temperature that alters the stability of this degron or the conformational change that enables the degron to be recognised by the protein degradation system, enabling a roughly 30-minute depletion time, at least when using this dihydrofolate reductase temperature-sensitive degron, which is around 25 kilodaltons. So to go into a bit more detail, from my understanding, these temperature-sensitive degrons employ the N-end rule, which basically means that a protein that doesn't have the canonical methionine at the N terminus is going to be more likely to be recognised for degradation. So if I show you the figure from the review article, what we can see is that this dihydrofolate reductase temperature-sensitive degron has a arginine residue at its N terminus, and at the lower temperature, this arginine residue, or the lysine residues within the degron that are needed to be ubiquitinated for degradation, are kind of hidden or less likely to be recognised by the degradation system. Yet at the higher temperature, there's some kind of conformational change that either exposes these residues that make it more likely for the protein to get degraded. Nonetheless, this requirement for a temperature change currently limits its use in mammalian cells. That should really say mammalian cells, not mammals, because mammalian cell lines tend to grow at 37 degrees, so having them at this lower temperature can have alternative effects on the cells, and also a rapid change in temperature can have a heat shock effect on the cells, so the phenotype you see might be reflecting the temperature change as opposed to removal or addition of the protein. Okay, so now we'll look at some of the small molecule degron systems, and the first one we'll look at is the Auxin inducible degron system. So this is one that actually I have some experience with, so would arguably know the most about compared to the others. And so this uses as its inducer, as opposed to temperature, it uses Auxin, and this Auxin recognises a degron. You got it referred to as an Auxin inducible degron, which, depending on the manipulation of the system, can either be around 27 or 7 kilodaltons. And estimates so far, well, not estimates, experiments have shown that the half-life of degradation can be around 30 minutes, which is pretty good, and it can be used in mammalian cell lines. So this system has actually been derived from plants, because plants have a unique degradation pathway that is controlled by the Auxin family plant hormones. So for this system to work for degradation of proteins, you need three components. You need the hormone itself, which is going to be Auxin. You need the degron that is recognised by Auxin, and you also need a third component, which is an F-box related protein called tier 1 that also binds to Auxin. And so when tier 1 binds to Auxin, it can then recognise the degron and bring in the machinery in the cell that will cause that protein to be degraded. So as you can see here, when the protein of interest is fused to the Auxin-inducible degron, in the presence of Auxin, Auxin binds to tier 1, tier 1 and Auxin as a complex come together and interact with the degron. And so tier 1 also interacts with skip1, col1 and RBX1. And this brings in, well, RBX1 interacts with the E2 ubiquitin ligase, which enables ubiquitination of the protein of interest and subsequent degradation. So this mechanism of degradation is conserved between plants and mammalian cells, which makes it kind of handy for us to use as a system. However, mammalian cells don't have tier 1, so if you want to use this in mammalian cells, that cell has to be expressing tier 1 for the system to work. And so the cool thing, as I've already mentioned, with the small molecule degron systems, is that you could add Auxin to the cells that would promote degradation of your protein of interest. But then at a later point, you could remove that Auxin and try to rescue the phenotype. So this reversibility of the system is kind of neat and enables you to, in the same cell, look at the phenotype before and then recovery of the phenotype on and off of the degradation, if that makes sense. But Auxin isn't the only plant hormone with a unique degradation pathway. What would happen if multiple hormones were employed simultaneously? Well, this Nature paper used a dual hormone approach, whereby they still used the Auxin system, but they also used this new system that they developed. And the reason that this works is because there's high specificity between the plant hormone and the degron and the F-box protein that recognises the hormone. So the new system that they developed in this paper is the jasmonate-induced degradation response. So unlike Auxin, they use this other hormone fused to isoleucine, so isoleucine conjugated jasmonate. They then have, instead of tier 1, a protein called COI1, And lastly, instead of an Auxin inducible degron, they have a Jazz degron. So what they go on to show in this paper is that you can now use these two different degradation systems to control the protein levels of two proteins of interest. So let's say protein of interest A is fused to the Auxin inducible degron and protein of interest B is fused to the Jazz degron. Therefore, if I add Auxin to the cells, I should only deplete protein of interest A. Yet if I add jasminate hormone, then I should only deplete protein of interest B. If I have both hormones together, both proteins should be depleted. And this is what they show in the paper to be correct, which is pretty awesome. So obviously there's many ways they could develop this further to improve it and enhance degradation rates, but there are many other hormones out there as well. So it's kind of exciting to see where this technology will lead. Alright, so the last small molecule degron system I'm going to tell you about involves the small molecule SHIELD1. And so SHIELD1 can bind to either a destabilizing domain or it can bind to a ligand-induced degradation domain. And so the nature of both of these degrons is very similar in that they're both derived from the FK506 binding protein. And so they both bind to SHIELD1, yet the destabilizing domain, as you might have guessed, is unstable and will get degraded unless it binds to SHIELD1 when the protein is then stabilized. On the other hand, when SHIELD1 binds to the ligand-induced degradation, it causes some conformational change that exposes the degron, and then that protein gets degraded. Hopefully you can see that clearly in this figure here. So the potentially cool aspect of the system here is that through the addition of SHIELD1, you could stabilize one protein and destabilize another. So if you have, let's say, a wild-type protein, and you fuse that to the ligand-induced degradation domain, and you had a mutated protein of interest, so the same protein, just the mutant version, with the destabilizing domain, then through the addition and removal of SHIELD, you could, in theory, swap the protein from being wild-type to mutant and then mutant back to wild-type, which would be a really neat system to have. So the likelihood is it probably isn't that simple, but in an idealized situation, if we plot a graph of how the protein levels would change, we would see that on the addition of SHIELD1, we'd see the wild-type levels go down and the mutant levels go up. And so the other neat thing with these small molecule degron systems is that depending on the concentration of the small molecule, in theory you would be able to have tight control over the level of the protein in the cell. So if you added a maximum concentration to deplete all of the protein, you could do a massive range from the maximum concentration to lower concentrations where, let's say, you deplete half the protein levels. And so that could also be a very useful thing to use in experimental systems. A dose-dependent titration, you might like to call it. Okay, so now let's look at light and conditional degron systems. So one such photosensitive degron, which is a LOV2 degron, uses blue light to induce degradation of the protein. And so this protein has roughly around 30-minute half-life, so pretty much on par with the small molecule systems. However, the use in mammalian cell lines so far has been a little bit limited. So I won't go into much more detail than this because the principle's pretty much the same. But the neat thing with the light inducible systems is that in addition to the temporal aspect, you can also add in a spatial aspect because obviously small molecules, they diffuse in fluid, whereas with light, you could precisely target specific cells. So this could be really useful for neuroscience research. I lied, I have gone into a tiny bit more detail. So you can see in this figure here that when you induce the cells with blue light, there's possibly some kind of conformational change that exposes the degron, which is fused to this LOV2 protein, and then the protein is then recognized for degradation. So this last category of conditional degrons focuses more on the expression of another protein to induce the degradation response. Now, this category is very diverse in terms of different systems, but the one I'll talk about here is referred to as SURF. And so SURF stands for split ubiquitin for the rescue of function. So the nature of this degron is quite complicated, so I'll explain it in a second. But the key point is that the inducer here is rapamycin. So technically a small molecule, but it also depends on an additional protein as well. And the half-life differs again because it just depends on the protein itself, as I'll explain in a second, but it can be used in mammalian cell lines, so happy days. So yep, I have shamelessly stolen the review article's figure because it looks nice, but what you can see is you have your protein of interest and you can see it fused to this degron domain. So it has the degron domain, but it also has half of the ubiquitin as well. It has the C-terminal part of ubiquitin. And so when you add rapamycin interacts with the degron domain. And by doing this, it also conceals, anneals, that's probably a better word, the two halves of ubiquitin. So now ubiquitin can get processed and the entire degron can just be cleaved off from the protein of interest. So in this case, rapamycin actually removes the tag and the protein's fine. But in the steady state without rapamycin, the protein gets degraded. So key point number one, you also need the expression of this smaller protein, this FKBP12, with the N-terminal part of ubiquitin for this system to work. And the second key point is that when you have the protein not being degraded, so in the presence of rapamycin, you have the protein of interest without any of the degrons. So that's good because now you've got your protein, but it's also not fused to anything. So that, these degrons could have secondary impact on the protein's function. It might prevent it interacting with certain other proteins. It could just destabilize the protein. So this is actually quite a cool system, but has the disadvantage that when you want to get rid of the protein, it's a more complicated system. Basically, I don't know, let's be honest. Okay, so what are the limitations then? Well, I've actually kind of introduced a couple of limitations along the way. But firstly, leading on from what I was just saying, is that we don't want this degron to actually affect the function of our protein of interest. That wouldn't be ideal. Secondly, the target degron at the moment is often used in exogenous genes and factors that may be overexpressing this protein. So the idea would be to get the degron to the endogenous gene loci. It depends on what you want to do anyway. But with CRISPR, this is definitely something that's quite feasible. There's also potentially issues with using auxin in mice, something to do with the liver. They metabolize it and the mice aren't happy. And lastly, speed. I said already that, you can get degradation within 30 minutes, but the faster that you can induce this degradation, the more direct the response is on the cell to that protein being removed. So, as I said, this is still a new technology and there are many variations of them already, and there are many ways that they can be modified and improved. So I think, the whole area is very exciting, and it'd be really interesting to see what kind of alternative ideas are developed, because I think all of these systems are really smart. I kind of, envious of whoever came up with these systems. They're very clever. But yeah, they're just really useful, and so I think this area definitely has a lot of growth. So watch this space, I suppose. Anyway, as always, hopefully this was a good introduction, and thank you for listening.